We begin with a Fox News alert. President Trump is now headed for Mar-a-Lago, Florida, after signing a historic tax bill into law. He also signed a bill to keep the government running through mid-January. The president is now set to spend the holidays in Florida as he looks ahead to a very busy 2018. Not that 2017 wasn't busy. This is Outnumbered. I'm Harris Faulkner, here today from the Fox Business Network. Dagan McDowell, Republican strategist and Fox News contributor Lisa Booth, Democratic strategist and Fox News contributor Jessica Tarlov, and Outnumbered today, Fox News contributor and political editor of townhall.com, Guy Benson. What a guy. It never gets old, really.
Those intros, you were like an NBA stadium announcer.
I did sports for a little while. Early in my career.
Great.
That was good.
Yeah.
You're feeling the Christmas spirit, I can tell.
And news director said, stick with news.
I don't know about that now. I thought I was going to be a singer. My mom said this wasn't going to happen. Lessons you have to learn growing up. Right?
Maybe she'll sing for us this hour.
Yeah,
Let's do the news. President Trump, again, is headed for Mar-a-Lago for Christmas. Before he left the White House just a few minutes ago, he signed two big bills into law. A bill to keep the government running through the middle of January, January 19th, and the historic tax bill that marks his first major legislative victory. Here he is.
I watched the news. As you know, we had the largest tax cuts in our history just approved. And I was going to wait for a formal signing sometime in early January. But then I watched the news this morning and they were all saying, will he keep his promise? Will he sign it by Christmas? You were one. But will he sign it by Christmas? And I called downstairs. I said, get it ready. We have to sign it now. Bottom line is this is the biggest tax cuts and reform in the history of our country. This is bigger than actually President Reagan's many years ago. I'm very honored by it. And all of this, everything in here, is really tremendous things for businesses, for people, for the middle class, for workers.
Big day. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts is live at the White House. John?
It was a big day, Harris. Good afternoon to you. This was the president's biggest legislative issue item. This was the thing that he campaigned on during the campaign and talked about as president for the last 11 months. Obamacare went first because he wanted to get extra money in there to put into this tax reform package. But tax reform was, for lack of a better phrase, the big kahuna for President Trump. He got it done kind of in record amount of time in terms of going from Congress down here to the White House. It's a huge bill. It had to go through the enrollment process, and the White House had to review it. But they got it in time for him to put pen to paper this morning and sign it just before he took off for his Christmas break. Listen to more of what the president said this morning.
This is the bill right here, and we're very proud of it. It's going to be a tremendous thing for the American people. I didn't want you folks to say that I wasn't keeping my promise. I am keeping my promise. I'm signing it before Christmas. I said that the bill would be on my desk before Christmas, and you are holding me literally to that. So we did a rush job today. It's not fancy, but it's the Oval Office.
No Democratic support for this bill. It passed only with Republican support. The president would like to change that next year. He's got some big legislative agenda items that he wants to get through, some of which will need Democratic support. One of those is rebuilding America's infrastructure. The president tweeting this morning, quote, at some point, and for the good of the country, I predict we will start working with the Democrats in a bipartisan fashion. Infrastructure would be a perfect place to start after having foolishly spent $7 trillion in the Middle East. It's time to start rebuilding our country. The president talked about the positive effects of tax reform already. Big corporations like Boeing, AT&T, Comcast, Wells Fargo, and Fifth Third Bank all giving out either Christmas bonuses to employees or increasing their minimum wage to $15 an hour. Boeing actually saying that it was going to increase charitable contributions because of that. While it is possible that the president could get bipartisan support for infrastructure, Harris, a couple of other agenda items he's got that will be much more difficult to attract Democratic support. Immigration reform, though he does want to get that DACA fix done, and that'll involve Democrats, and welfare reform. It's not likely that a lot of Democrats will want to sign on to welfare reform, but like President Clinton did in 1996, President Trump could use the reconciliation process to get welfare reform through on a simple majority. So we'll see where that goes. No question, a lot to come in 2018. If 2017 wasn't busy enough for you, just wait a little while.
Yep, you got it. Add water and stir. John Roberts, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Merry Christmas, my friend.
And to you, too.
Thank you. You know what I'm noticing is kind of a trend, as John Roberts was reporting there? The president isn't looking to just get DACA. He's not looking just for tax cuts. It's a reformation. Why is that? Because that makes things more difficult to get. You heard immigration reform, welfare reform. Why is that, do you think?
Well, I think reform is a buzzword in Washington, which is basically changing the law to make it what you want it to be.
Oh, thank you. Okay, all right.
So that's the framing of it, right? The thing that struck me, Harris, watching the video there from the president as it came in, and we talked about this morning on Maria Bartiromo's show, Dagan, I was a little bit confused that they were going to have this not live, not dramatic signing ceremony with the president all by himself in the Oval Office. It seemed like a big missed opportunity, optics-wise, for the White House. And then we heard what the president actually said, and his explanation made perfect sense to me, which is, I want to get this thing signed as soon as possible, keep the pre-Christmas promise, get this thing, the logistics implemented as soon as possible. And then they said there's going to be another ceremony coming up in the new year to remind everyone about tax reform. And my recommendation for the White House, go out and find middle-class families from across the country that are going to benefit from this tax reform bill. It won't be hard to find them because it's 80% of Americans. Have them surrounding the president when he does the more symbolic ceremony and drive that point home.
You know, I wonder, though, if the Republicans, Lisa, aren't in the risk of looking the mission accomplished banner like. You know, you heard the president say, you've heard others among lawmakers who helped pass the tax legislation. February 1st is really when you start to feel that. Why don't you do it on February 2nd? Right? Then you have everybody with their paychecks, or February 10th, or whatever it is, that you open up that paycheck and you really start to see it.
See, if I was the Republicans and President Trump, I would be pushing this as the massive political win that it absolutely is, because the media sure isn't going to give them credit. So President Trump,
right.
Republicans need to go out there, claim that banner, because this is a huge win. This is something they've been trying to get done for 30 years. And it's not just tax reform. It's drilling in Anwar, something that proponents have been trying to get done for 40 years. It's the repeal of the individual mandate, something Republicans have been promising for 8 years now. And so this is a massive win. And for a president who the left and the media has continued to criticize for his truthfulness, this is a president who has demonstrated that he keeps his promises. You can go down the list: immigration, moving the embassy to Jerusalem, pushing back on ISIS, confirming Neil Gorsuch.
Crushing ISIS.
The list goes on and on and on about him keeping his promises.
And the regulatory reform has been a huge thing that has been driving the stock market this year. We can't, one new regulation, 22 regulations gone, because you had an entire, talk about reformation, a government takeover of student loans, of the internet, of essentially health care in this country, Dodd-Frank regulations under Obama. A lot of that has been rolled back.
So my question, though, was specifically about risk. And what I hear you saying, Lisa, is you don't buy into that at all. Just go out and get it done.
Right.
This is such a huge win, because I followed each little baby step of them putting this plan together, starting with they were going to have that border adjustment tax. That was the original Paul Ryan idea.
Which was heavily criticized by many Republicans.
There were so many dumb ideas that were thrown out, reducing 401k contributions, changing the way that capital gains are handled for retail investors.
Are you happy with where it is now?
Yes, they didn't. But those things didn't end up in this. And the fact that they coalesced around something that is pro-growth, that hands a tax cut to 80% or more Americans, that it is astonishing.
Jessica, before I come to you, my big question for you is, when do Democrats jump into the warmer waters now? But before that, the president actually talked earlier, just moments ago, about what he has learned in terms of working with people in Congress and shaping relationships. Let's watch that.
It's been a process. It's been a great process, really beautiful. But I do believe that the fact that I have gotten to know so many of these people, and many of these people, I have to say, I'm not saying all, but I'm saying many of these people are great people that truly love this country. So I think that helps. And I think you'll see that in this legislation.
You also saw the president talking about when the time is for bipartisanship, those opportunities. He fully anticipates infrastructure. He said that'll be the easiest thing he does. So when did Democrats jump in?
I think they certainly jump in if infrastructure is what comes next. He'll have to talk to Paul Ryan, who wants welfare reform next. I think that's a major mistake for Republicans to go after that right now, because if you get into a fight with Democrats about entitlement reform after you've had this arguably huge win on the tax reform bill or the tax bill, I think that doesn't bode well. Infrastructure, Donald Trump knows he's an infrastructure guy. I mean, he builds buildings, and he's worked with Democrats his whole life. He's a New Yorker. We're full of Democrats here. And I think that he's smart to say that that's the moment. But to your question to Lisa about the riskiness here.
I want to say something about infrastructure, though. This is critically important. You have several $trillion, $2.5 trillion thereabouts. President Trump says it's $4 trillion of money, of profits that are overseas, that with a 15.5% repatriation tax that is in this tax reform bill, if that money comes back here, it's taxed immediately, and it has been talked about by major politicians that that's one way that they could pay for infrastructure. And that is why the Democrats won't get on board with it, because that would hand the president a win. So let's get ready for Pelosi pothole to try and help her.
I'm really not sure that that's true. We all are
2018.
acutely aware of the fact that we have 10 Democrat senators up for re-election in states that went blood red for Donald Trump. Joe Manchin needs to do this stuff. Claire McCaskill, Heidi Heitkamp.
You think they would do it?
I do think
Heidi
they will.
Heitkamp was literally making up things about this tax bill.
Heidi Heitkamp got on Air Force One and stood up there on the same stage with Donald Trump to appeal to North Dakotans to say, I understand that you voted for this man and that some of his agenda does appeal to you.
She said that it was going to be a $9,000 tax hike on people in her state, and it's a lie. She couldn't read a
Do you know
chart.
how many lies come out of both sides? And it's unfortunate.
She couldn't read numbers, and she still hasn't retracted it.
I'm pretty confident that Heidi Heitkamp can read numbers. I'm also confident that we know what we need to do to win, and some of that might be to stand on stage with Donald Trump and to work together on infrastructure to make sure.
Against him. All right. Like, so she stood on stage with him and then voted no.
Yeah, but that bill is not good for Americans.
I want to assure everyone that our Christmas spirit is strong. All right. Well, it looks like Democrats have their work cut out for them in 2018. They have failed to deliver on a fix for DACA, the Obama-era program that protects from deportation thousands of undocumented immigrants brought here as children. Before the Senate vote on the spending bill yesterday, or the continuing resolution to kick it to January 19th, members of the Hispanic Caucus, a 31-member group of the House and Senate Democrats, gathered in Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer's office, trying to push him to do more for those so-called dreamers. It reportedly got pretty heated. Congressional leaders have signaled they'll revisit the DACA issue in the new year. The program ends March 5th, so you got another looming deadline. Lisa?
Well, look, so March 5th is like forever in congressional terms. So that's
it's 2 government shutdowns away.
Yeah, we are so far away from that. It's like a year away. So I think that's why this isn't getting done right now. And I also think that I would have to guess that Speaker Ryan and Majority Leader Mitch McConnell gave assurances to Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer that something's going to get done on DACA. But if you're President Trump, this is the opportunity for him to leverage DACA to get some of his immigration priorities done. So I think it would be malpractice for him to not push for funding for the border wall, not push for the RAISE Act, not push for some of these principles that he's campaigned on and that he said were his priorities.
Guy?
I think the contours for a deal on DACA are there. And I went back when this first arose as an issue when President Trump canceled Obama's policy. I went back and looked at that Gang of 8 bill that passed the Senate but not the House during the end of the Obama administration. And in that bill, which all the Senate Democrats supported, it called for 700 miles of completed fencing, a physical barrier, and a doubling of border agents.
Well, and Democrats have voted for fencing
they all
as well.
voted for it. So I think if you're going to say, let's do this DACA thing, which I think is fair and the right thing to do, let's get some border security in there as well. And here's what Democrats are already on the record supporting. I think that's how this gets done.
Well, here's how we know that the president has that in mind, because when he spoke at his last cabinet meeting, we think for the year, he said, you never know, but it was supposed to be.
They could all show up at Mar-a-Lago.
He specifically talked about how he wants to go down and visit the wall and see those half-dozen prototypes that they've been working on. Remember, in Arizona, we had it on overtime about a month ago when they were choosing, and we sent a reporter down. We got to kick the tires and see those prototypes. The president has said that's next on his to-do list, and wouldn't it be, I mean, it's kind of sequential, right? For him to fold that into someplace with the legislation they're working on. Dagan?
Well, what's going on in Mexico, too, gives him support for his idea to really crack down on illegal immigration. This is going to be the deadliest year in modern history for Mexico in terms of murders. You have stories about, bodies hanging off bridges in tourist destinations. This teenager killed because he said something negative on social media about a drug cartel kingpin. So I think that that resonates with the American people. And also, to Nancy Pelosi's point, DACA, I said this on this very couch, that she literally was more concerned about 700,000 people under DACA than the 140 million people that this tax reform now law impacts. And I think in terms of optics, that kind of says it all. It's this sliver of people in this country versus a giant swath of this country that she's really concerned about.
Yeah, but at the same time, Jessica, as much as that may be true, the Dreamers don't feel that way at all. Remember when she got bum rushed at the lectern almost 2 months ago now? They were not happy with her focus and what it has been on DACA. So even though you may feel like there's a sliver, the sliver isn't even happy.
No, well, but we do know, which rarely happens, that we have politicians on both sides of the aisle that are making DACA their priority. Jeff Flake said when he went into negotiations to get a yes vote on the tax reform bill, he said that he wanted the provisions for DACA, and he got a little steamrolled there, I think, on that front. So I do see this happening. I agree with you that it should be attached for Republicans' benefit and, frankly, for the safety of Americans, and even messaging for Democrats going into 2018 that we do need to have some enhanced border security measures that we can say, hey, we heard you. We know how you reacted to what happened to Kate Steinle and the verdict there, and we know what's going on in some of these sanctuary cities.
That would be a little revisionist history, though, because we didn't hear from many Democrats when that was going on.
No,
just going to insert that.
Or from Hillary Clinton either during, because she was actually criticized. Was it Chris Matthews had criticized her for not dressing illegality during the campaign? He said that hurt her. So that's interesting for you to make that point.
Her. I mean, you have to. Donald Trump certainly won, at least in part, to the harsh rhetoric about illegal immigrants who come here and hurt people, not the 11 million who are here and are working hard and want their kids to have a better life.
Republicans have a real opportunity, and they may use it, as I'm hearing, because there is some shifting now in how they would see handling issues like DACA and immigration for families, keeping those core families together.
And let's hope those stories where they're separating families do not continue.
He went on turning the economy around, and today was a mic drop.
All right. Okay. Mic drop for you. Democrats make their pick for the top guy on the House Judiciary Committee, not our guy there. And it may show they're preparing to push for the president's impeachment. We'll talk about that. And new reaction to the explosive report this week alleging that the Obama administration gave a major terrorist group a pass in order to preserve the nuclear deal with Iran. Stay close.
A growing number of Republicans demanding answers after an investigative report claims the Obama administration gave a free pass to Hezbollah's drug trafficking and money laundering operations, and did it to make sure the Iran nuclear deal stayed on track. Senator Ben Sasse asking the Justice, Treasury, and State Departments for, quote, answers to these disturbing allegations. And the Nebraska Republican adding in his letter, quote, if the administration did so in order to shore up its foolish nuclear deal with Iran, it was a mistake of historical proportions, a mistake the consequences of which reach from the battlefields of Syria to the streets of Omaha and Scotts Bluff. Wow. Guy, these are incredible charges, but I think for anybody who feels like this is a bad deal to begin with, this makes it smell bad, even worse.
Yeah, and you start to wonder, were there no depths to which the Obama administration was unwilling to go in order to pursue this terrible nuclear deal with an Iranian regime that cheats all the time, that their leaders chant death to America. It was a lopsided, terrible deal. And apparently the Obama administration was able to let Hezbollah, a terrorist organization, off the hook for a drug trafficking ring, which they used to cull money for terrorist activities, and we turned a blind eye to it deliberately to grease the skids for this nuclear deal with the regime in Tehran, which is extraordinary. That's the foreign policy side of it. part of the reason that this story really bothers me, there's a great column today in the New York Post from David Harsanyi, who's tracking the media coverage or lack thereof of this particular story. It came out in Politico. This was a meticulously sourced, multiple named sources, documents that back up this story, and it has been greeted with near silence from most of the mainstream media.
Except for the Wall Street Journal editorial page. They wrote an editorial about it. And one of the quotes is an Obama Treasury official telling the House Foreign Affairs Committee that under the Obama administration, Hezbollah-related, quote, investigations were tamped down for fear of rocking the boat with Iran.
Wow.
Jeopardizing the nuclear deal.
Look, this is the administration that gave us the talking point from the president himself of a JV team for the Islamic State savages, as I call them. And look how long it took us, not the decade that some Democrats said that it would take us to take them down out of their nesting hole in Raqqa, Syria. But look how long it did take us, though, because we were under the determination by the Obama administration that they were not big players on the landscape of terrorism. But, you know, this causes, I think, and I'll be quick with this, a look at what we've recently learned from Ambassador Nikki Haley's investigation at the UN and those warehouse sites that were behind her, that she's invited other countries to look at that map, that poster board, and see where the Iranian markings were on weapons that are killing so many people and forcing a humanitarian crisis in Yemen through a proxy war. It makes me look to see, well, how long had that been going on? And does this also fall under that category of the Obama administration wanting to tamp things down? But maybe not look. It's just a question.
Well, and we knew this, though. Even as we were negotiating as a nation this Iran nuclear deal, Iran, then and now, state sponsor of terrorism.
The number one in the world.
Number one, funneling money to terrorist organizations. Hezbollah in Yemen, these Yemen rebels firing these missiles that you're talking about at Saudi Arabia. We knew this. And this administration, as part of this nuclear deal with Iran, shipped $1.7 billion in cash, pallets of cash, in the middle of the night, and we would never know about it if not for the Wall Street Journal.
Let's just put this in a nutshell, too. I mean, the President Obama, essentially by turning a blind eye, propped up Hezbollah with $1 billion, they said, in a year they profited off of this, for his legacy. To protect his legacy, which is the Iran deal. And it wasn't just the Obama administration turning a blind eye. It's the media. Newsbusters reported on the media blackout from ABC, CBS, and NBC on this story, which was well-sourced. Meanwhile, running countless stories about the Russia investigation that has turned out not to be true from anonymous sources.
Well, listen, I think it is a great disservice to everybody that the entire news media is talking about this story. It's an amazing read. Everyone should look at it. And there have been a number of prominent journalists from a bunch of networks who are calling that out. Jake Tapper was tweeting about it, saying, how is this guy who wrote it not the #1 guest on every single show? And I think that that's important.
Well, how is it? Why is it?
Well, I'm not a booker. I would have.
Take a guess. If you were to guess why this is not a huge story, what would the reason be?
Liberal bias?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to give it to you.
Look,
I would
Jessica's
say also
very candid. Listen to her. She is.
I mean, what have I got to lose at this point?
I'm glad that you said it.
What does she have to lose?
Right. When Trump said it, that wasn't cute, though. You said that Iran cheats on the deal constantly. Rex Tillerson and a number of officials have said that's not
Iran
the case.
Cheats,
Nikki Haley,
cheats generally.
the evidence that she put out there at the UN, there are a number of defense officials that are pushing back on that, who are saying that they can't be sure as to when that drone was up there.
Back.
No, I'm just saying that these aren't definitive. I'm looking to see, what do other officials say about this? Do they say they are cheating on the deal?
Iran cheats systematically on almost everything.
Yes.
That's my point. State
sponsor of terrorism funneling our cash to these terrorist organizations.
Wasn't it their cash in the first place?
No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't. You know what? The courts actually have held up Iranian assets in these banks in the United States because it's owed to the families of those victims of terrorism. Right on the heels of an epic win on tax reform, new reports that there could be some tension in the White House over the 2018 midterms. Will recent legislative victories help secure seats for Republicans, or do they have reason to be worried?
Well, hot off the heels of its historic tax reform victory, the White House now is turning its attention to the 2018 midterms. After recent Republican losses in Alabama, New Jersey, and Virginia, There are reportedly growing fears of more congressional setbacks, which could paralyze the president's legislative agenda moving into next year. This as President Trump gathered Wednesday in the Oval Office with top aides, including Chief of Staff John Kelly, Counselor Kellyanne Conway, Communications Director Hope Hicks, and Political Director Bill Sepien, to talk about the political environment ahead of the midterms. Also there, former campaign manager Corey Lewandowski and former Trump 2016 digital director Brad Parscale. The president reportedly also met with former White House Chief of Staff Reince Priebus on the very same topic just earlier this week. Now, some reports are that it got kind of contentious in that meeting, and that there might not be unison agreement on how you go forward. How much do you use the president? How much do you
imagine that? Disunity in the Republican Party.
Or in that room.
It's a very unified moment because of tax reform, but I do think a lot of Republicans are looking at the polling, which has double-digit generic ballot leads for Democrats in almost every poll, and that is a worrisome sign. And you look at, from a Republican perspective, you look at the gender gap going so heavily against Republicans. You look at the enthusiasm of turnout in places like Virginia, I think was a bellwether. Something has to change. So I think the House is definitely in jeopardy for Republicans. The Senate map is very kind to the GOP, but they're going to have to knock off some Senate Democrats who represent Trump states. And I think if the White House is going to be smart about this, they're going to look at the polling state by state and pinpoint he is still popular in North Dakota, West Virginia, Missouri, Indiana. Deploy him to places where the most vulnerable Democrats are seated, and leave it to just those.
I have a question for you, Lisa, because you've worked on campaigns before. So how does it work? I know it's a holiday season, but it's also a good time to talk with people. So do you think this White House thing goes and does its own polling? And what kind of questions do you ask? The president hovering some as low as 33, 32% on popularity, as high as 35. That's still relatively low, historically speaking. So how do you punch that up so you can widen it out besides those states where he won or did well?
Well, yeah, I've worked during two wave elections now, 2010 and 2014. But look, to be fair to President Trump, it's the same with any president, right? President Obama wasn't going around campaigning in every congressional district or every state. You go and campaign in the states where you can help boost the candidate on the ballot that you're trying to help. So they're going to be judicious about what states they send the president to. So, I mean, that's just the same.
Yeah.
Exactly. And look, I do think the House is more in play than the Senate. Democrats just need to knock off 24
But how do you attack that unpopularity? What do you do? I mean, is the White House looking to... I mean, you've got the tax reform.
Each candidate focuses on the congressional district at hand, the state on hand, and Democrats do have a very big uphill battle in the Senate. There's only one state, the state of Nevada, where Hillary Clinton won the state, where there's a GOP incumbent. Meanwhile, Senate Democrats are defending 10 Senate seats that President Trump won in, 5 that he won by double digits. So the Senate map is not favorable for Democrats, and the chances of them knocking that off are going to be tough.
I caution the Democrats for being overconfident because, again, what are you going to run on? We hope the tax reform fails. We hope that you don't get more money in your paycheck, because that's a lot of the messaging that you've heard in the last week. Frankenstein from Nancy Pelosi, Armageddon, end of the world. That doesn't resonate with people. Then, on the other hand, you watch what has happened on the Judiciary Committee in the House. The top Democrat on that committee is now from New York, big Democrat, Gerald Nadler. His specialty, impeachment. So what is their platform? Hey, if you elect us to these seats, we're going to impeach the president. Well, that does not connect.
Well, that doesn't hand anybody any greater life than they already have now. I mean, people vote based on what will happen in their own lives.
100% then they will. But
Trump rates better than the actual Republicans in Congress do. 40% in the new Wall Street Journal poll say he's made the economy better.
If it's just on the economy, I could understand this not being as bad for Republicans. But if you look at the generic ballot, which Guy pointed out here, you're talking 13 to 15 points ahead for Dems. I agree. I don't think we're going to take back the Senate. I think we have to just work really hard to defend in those red states. And that's fine for the status quo. As far as Jerry Nadler just specializing in impeachment, there's a lot more to him, and he is my congressman as well. I think that he was a smart pick. He is an experienced legislator. I personally am not a fan of the impeachment track. Nancy Pelosi Pelosi isn't as well. Chuck Schumer isn't either. There are 25 Democrats.
Nadler wrote on a leaflet outlining his record. Nadler is our strongest member to lead a potential impeachment.
Yeah, Jerry Nadler has had decades long of a career. Just that is not the only thing that defines him. I totally take your point, but Democrats would be silly to lead with that as the policy for 2018. We can talk about economic policies the Democratic Party support that will make people better off, like raising the minimum wage. We can talk about health care.
They voted against $15 minimum wage at Wells Fargo.
You know that as being Jessica's congressman.
All right. We got to move on. Republican lawmakers at odds over whether to focus on repealing and replacing Obamacare in 2018 or move on to other agenda items. Does the GOP tax bill deliver enough of a blow already? It's not a bill anymore. It's a law. We'll talk about it. Stay close.